At the same time, like there's also this trap that like Southeast Asia, like Southeast Asia's historical competitive edge has traditionally been like an abundance of like cheap and low skilled labor, which is something that like AI actually could automate. And so like this is also why a lot of Southeast Asian investment is towards infrastructure now instead of talent as well. And while
Abundance
there
of
is
like cheap
investments in
and low
talent, a lot
skilled
of this is
labor,
also
which is
towards
something that like
creating
AI
talent to actually
actually
work in these
could
manufacturing
automate.
industries.
And so like this is also why a lot of
Right, next.
Southeast Asian investment is towards infrastructure now
So
instead of talent as well.
despite all that, like and while
Abundance
there
of
is
like cheap
investments in
and low
talent, generally
skilled
like
labor,
this is also
which is
towards
something
really
that like
lose hope.
AI
Like we're not just
actually
spectators of like
work
what's
in
gonna
these
happen or what we think is gonna happen. So a middle power is basically like a country that's neither like a front like neither the US or China, so not a frontier state. Or it's not really like a small state with no leverage. So mostly these are countries that are already part of like the semiconductor and AI supply chain, or like folks with a lot of regulatory power, like the EU, for example. And researchers have also studied this problem and are citing like roughly five strategies that middle powers could pursue. So I could walk through all of these as well. And basically the motivation for this is that whoever controls the value chain bottleneck, so whichever bottlenecks in the value chain, even just one, like we don't have to own the whole value chain, right? Or the whole supply chain, could control the terms of how it's governed. And this is important because when you really think about it, we don't actually have any sort of control to what like AI companies could do should that get deployed in, let's say, the Philippines, right? Because these companies are not really registered here. We don't have jurisdiction over them, and we can't really force them to do certain things unless we're probably blocking certain things that they need. So one thing would be to build resilience for transformative AI. So like some of the risks that I talked about earlier can't be fully prevented. So instead you have to prepare for them. So that means, for example, like trying to work on critical infrastructure legislation, right? Or like actual infrastructure against AI-powered cyber attacks, or like protecting elections from like AI-generated disinformation, or like building institutional capacity to actually respond quickly when things go wrong. So a lot of this is essentially, okay, what do we have now? And then how could we basically make sure that it works when we actually need them? And some of these are like, at least in legislation, in the legislative sense, like a lot of tech policy is still actually ongoing. Like a lot of the bills right now that are actually prioritized in Congress are on tech policy, and that's something that you should probably look at as well and follow and monitor with House and Senate as they go on, especially that. So maybe like to cite some bills that are pending right now, aside from us actually having our own like building our own AI development and regulation act, is like the fake news bill, so like anti-misinformation, child digital safety and social media ban. There's something that also includes, let's say, AI enabled social media, um, like critical infrastructure and cybercrime prevention, something that's like ongoing as well. So there's a lot of these that are still being decided on and would benefit from input from folks who would care about them and who has the expertise also to talk to governance people regarding this. Second would be to adapt and to thrive. So instead of, let's say, racing to build frontier models ourselves, which is really, really expensive and most countries probably cannot realistically win, um, it would also make sense to try to capture economic gains from using it, which would mean like aggressive adoption. And that would essentially mean you're building public services and economy around like what AI could actually do. But then this more of like, oh, if we're accepting that AI is really, really transforming society, then we should probably, let's say, reskill workers for more augmentable work or functions that we discussed earlier, right? Or make sure that like certain like controls, for example, or like public services are actually something that AI couldn't really affect as of now. But then this is more of like a moving part, or a moving target that is quite hard to actually pinpoint. And third is to shape governance. So yeah, you don't need to build frontier AI models yourself to actually have influence over how it gets governed. You could set standards, you could run evaluations, you could try to convene conversations around this, without owning like the models itself. And again, like whoever controls the bottlenecks in the value chain, like chips, data, compute, talent, energy, etc., they have like a lot of leverage on how the system gets governed. And one way that this has been done as well by countries like the UK, for example, without a frontier lab, is by creating their own AI safety institute or a security institute, wherein they basically ask for or like negotiate for free market access for um certain models before it was released, and then run their own evils on it, set their own standards, such that yeah, it becomes something that like the rest like follows in terms of credibility, right? Next slide, please. So the fourth thing would be to build together with other middle powers or other consumer states. So that essentially would be like maybe a coalition of countries pooling resources to actually build an AI model. So this is quite difficult for the Philippines, honestly, just because like we don't have much resources on this, except a lot of our contribution in the supply chain is actually like very far off the actual AI model itself. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's a possibility. But yeah, another thing would be like preventing AI risk altogether, which is also building coalitions, but then more focused on prevention. Let's say coordinating export controls on certain hardware, agreeing on like shared market access conditions, maybe drawing red lines together. So like stuff that are supposedly like, okay, this is like a big no for any like AI model or a frontier AI company. That's something that we could negotiate as well, um, with a coalition with a group of like other um countries. And this really like solidifies a case for like AI diplomacy, for working on AI diplomacy, since yeah, this is also like strategies that are mutually exclusive. Like some countries could do a lot of them or a combination of them as well. So next slide, please. Next slide. Mm, okay. Oh, can you go back? Sorry. Uh, go back. Slide 26, I think. Oh, okay. Uh, back another, back another one. Okay, there. So, sorry. Yeah. So the bottom line is really like we should generally build the groundwork now. Um, yeah. So like no one can reliably predict how transformative AI will unfold, and instead of over-regulating on like something like guesswork, then the more realistic thing and the more concrete thing would be to build institutional capacity to make good decisions um, as we go in the future. So something that I put in a screenshot here is like called radical optionality. It's an article by this people like Winter and Bullock. I forgot their first names. And yeah, they basically have this idea that like, okay, we could be a little bit more flexible in how we're doing the first wave of AI legislation, just because if we ban too many things at the start, then we also risk stifling innovation, for example, um, and also even banning legitimate use. Because, like I said, so maybe something like, for example, in biorisk, if you ban, let's say, using like not really ban, but one way, like for example, that AI enables bias could be to increase uplift or basically increase the skill of the person, like a fairly knowledgeable person in, let's say, creating biohazards or um like new pathogens, for example. But then like you can't necessarily just remove like all bio-related data on, let's say, the model, because that would also basically remove like very illegitimate use case of those things. Let's say, I don't know, high school biology, or yeah, like very, very basic concepts in biology that would be actually useful for certain use cases, right? So the same thing goes with like governance, in which case you can't really like ban everything, especially if you haven't studied it yet. And four ways from the radical optionality that I think we could also uh adapt would be, one would be like having information gathering authorities. So maybe establishing first like like a council, or like similar, something similar to like a standards safety institute, or like a standards institute, wherein we essentially try to study like how AI is impacting our society in a more like Philippine specific context, and how can we actually use this intelligence to sort of build safer regulations moving forward. And then second would be like having flexible rules and definitions. So basically creating like regulatory definitions that could be updated over time. So for example, something like before, like GPAI or general purpose AI has been defined primarily as something that's within with a specific compute threshold. I think it's like a flop of like 10 to the 26. But then we realize over time that that compute threshold, because of like AI progress, has started to become outdated. So now models are just like at that level of compute, even though they're not very like super dangerous anyway. Um, the third thing is like assessments and evaluations. So being able to build capacity to actually evaluate the frontier models, or even base models, or even like fine-tuned models distilled from like the frontier open source ones, to actually see if there's any risk that are Philippine specific that could that it could produce as well, that haven't been seen yet. And then third is like hiring and talent. So really, really building a lot more talent in the space, and hopefully getting them to work on these problems as well. Next slide, please. So that means, yeah, essentially like the building blocks for like finding policy is like something like probably like radical optionality, right? Because right now AI governance is still an open question globally. Like there's really no agreed international standards yet. We have like the ISO 4200, but a lot of that is AI risk management instead of like certain technical thresholds. We have very little solid evidence on which interventions actually work in practice. And yeah, that's essentially true for any country as well. It's not just the Philippines who's behind on this. No one really has solved it yet. And in the Philippines specifically, though we have a huge adoption and like individual adoption of AI, and plenty of Filipinos use AI tools personally, the institutional and enterprise adoption is low, meaning that regulating it now wouldn't actually make sense, because there would be nothing to regulate, unless we want people like the government to regulate people, which would be like surveillance adjacent, and that's probably something we don't want to do. Um, And yeah, right now only 14.9% of Philippine firms use AI tools at all. Um, this according to like a study by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. And a lot of that adoption is concentrated in, as expected, ICT and BPO companies in urban centers. So most Philippine businesses, maybe outside of Metro Manila, aren't even using this technology in any organized way. They're just using it, like the employees are just using it individually. Um, and given that gap, and here's like I think what we should prioritize is, one again is to establish a coordination council or standards institute, and have clear mandates for sectoral regulators who already exists and already oversee different industries rather than inventing like maybe a new bureaucracy from scratch. And then second would be to support the workforce transition across sectors that we already know are impacted by AI from the data earlier, because these are sectors that would probably need support and extra investment as well in order to actually transition better as like transformative AI is evolving. And third is maybe like, for example, requiring disclosure of AI for critical infrastructure, but just generally like having any sort of like regulation prioritizing like critical infrastructure would be very, very good to have as an initial start, because at least for critical infrastructure, we already know it has like a big scale of people that it could possibly affect and could be very, very dangerous. And that's something that maybe we could agree as something that should already be regulated, given that also have like sectoral regulatory bodies as well. So next slide, please. So yeah, what is there to work on? So next slide, please. So I think some observations from the past year that I've been working in the Philippine AI policy space is that I think there's been a lot more online discourse on AI and its impact. I think most of them has been motivated by Pax Silica, which is good because people are thinking about this as well already. But yeah, that's exciting to know, because it means there's also more interest from the general public to learn more about AI, its risk, and how to govern them. So I've been personally organizing a couple of hackathons, talks, events, and even camps for the past 2 years on AI safety and governance. And I've also been realizing that across these programs that I've been like organizing, like the interest, like the number of people who are interested, I've been doubling every 6 months almost, and that's exciting for me. Well, because when I started in the space, there's probably like 5 people I know who was working on this, and now there's a lot more. Which means there's a lot more discourse happening and there's a lot more exchange of ideas. And it's also probably motivating like civil society to organize a lot more about and speak more about AI safety and governance. And a lot of the tech bills, like I said earlier, are pending in legislation, and those prioritized has already mentions of AI, which is something that is quite actionable now. If that's something that you're a little bit more interested in, right? We're also in the process of drafting our own like Philippine AI Act, or like the AI Development Regulation Act. So these are essential, like these are literally like some very concrete examples or signals that okay, there's actually a growing AI safety and governance space in the Philippines. The next slide, please. So there's probably like a lot of ways to go about it. I'll start with like the technical route. So if you're like an engineer or like someone with computer science background, or maybe you're someone like me, I don't have a computer, like a big computer science background, but I ended up like dabbling in this as well. Is maybe working on like technical AI safety. I pasted here like links, like a research agenda basically from a shallow review of technical AI safety. So you could probably just Google that. We really like we release one every year. I worked on this one in 2025, but we recorded that over 2025, there's been a lot more papers and efforts globally on technical AI safety that's related to these agenda. So like something that's a bit more engineering, or trying to get into like how models work, behavioral, or how models output stuff. And then cognitive, that's or like approaches for like internal reasoning or representation or decision making properties of AI systems. And yeah, maybe something you could do is I tried first example would be to identify how risk manifests across different contexts. So this probably bias, but like I would say that like the MIT AI Risk Initiative, AI risk taxonomy has one of the more comprehensive taxonomies around what risks are already recorded in literature. And they also have an incident database tracker, which you could check out in terms of what incidents have been recorded globally that is related to AI, right? Second stream of work is probably trying to mitigate these risks. So if you've identified them, maybe via evaluations, benchmarking, then how do you build like guardrails to make sure that these risks are mitigated? And the third one is a bit more theoretical, but like maybe working on promising methods to help you do either number one or number two, right? So maybe trying to scale how to look at model internals, because right now there's ways to actually look at how models think. It's just not very scalable. Or making AI monitoring harder to cheat, because or evaluations harder to cheat, because that's something that AI could also game. Maybe that's something that they eventually train on, because a lot of these benchmarks are also published online. And yeah, maybe do more theoretical work on novel approaches to instill guardrails. So like something like, oh, how are values formed? How are values instilled? Do values self-heal, for example? So that's something that you could also like look at, and you definitely could reach out to me after if you wanna do like a little bit more like, deep dive on this, because this is quite big as a list. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so there's some PH specific work on technical AI safety as well. So some things that we could probably look at is, for example, like how to defend against AI-powered cyber attacks from foreign state-sponsored groups. Something that Anjafric also has recorded that has happened over the past year. Maybe, yeah, can we also protect Philippine consumers from AI-written scams or disinformation, given that our scam and fraud are like very widespread in the Philippines and generally in Southeast Asia as well. So we're one of the hotspots for AI enabled or AI induced frauds and scams, actually. Maybe looking at if safety guardrails also hold across different low resource languages like Tagalog, Cebuano, etc. And other Philippine languages that we could look at. And maybe you could also use AI to help us navigate future risks. Maybe you build AI tools for forecasting or for collective epistemics. And collective epistemics meaning, let's say, deliberative tooling. So like something like what Taiwan has done before at VTaiwan, wherein they this is not government this is not a government project, but like I think it's like a grassroots project wherein they tried to create a platform to basically source ideas from different people regarding certain legislation, which I think Better Gov is actually doing a lot. It's just, yeah, kudos to them. There's also the governance route. So next slide, please. Yeah, so there's also the governance route. So you could look at like social impacts. So how fast are AI models actually gaining economic value, for example, versus I think majority of the literature on this is really like on US and European studies. So this would be good to have like something that's a bit more PH specific. Yeah, what's the actual extent, for example, of AI-induced psychosis in the Philippines? So like basically, I would describe it as something like AI-induced psychosis as something like if you are a person who uses AI and eventually you're just convinced of like what AI tells you, regardless of like whether it's like true or false. It's like something around that. And yeah, you could probably look at like the cultural, political, or economic context of this. Like how, like for example, is there, I don't know, AI saturation legislation, or like is there AI saturation in like, I don't know, tweets, for example, or do people believe in it? If I give an AI argument to someone, would they actually believe in it more versus like a human generated argument, right? So those are like benchmarks that a little bit it's a little bit more like research for research sake, but it's also very, very important in creating baselines on how you want to deal with these risks or where we are at this risk. And yeah, the other thing would be the Philippine AI strategy. So again, like what random optionality looks like in the Philippines, the one I presented earlier. So what feels like Pax Silicon mean for us, or what industrial policy would mean for us. How can we face governance to maybe balance interests of multiple stakeholders? Like at which point in time should we do certain regulations or do certain policies, for example? or what should AI diplomacy even look like for the Philippines? Because this is something that we haven't really talked about as well at a bigger scale. So yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, I'd like to end with this. Safe AI Philippines has opened its hubs for the second run of its AI Governance Accelerator. So if you're interested in governance and actually wanting to like deep dive more on that, yeah, feel free to scan this QR code or like go to like safeai.ph/accelerator/AI governance/apply. So I'll be accepting applications until September 4th. And so far there's been a lot of folks who's like expressed interest in application. So I'm excited to also see that from you guys. And yeah, that's it for my talk. Thank you so much. And next slide, please. I think I'll just flash like my email there if you guys want to reach out to me. So yeah, feel free to like have a low bar for reaching out. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Lance, for that very insightful talk on AI safety and governance. So for this portion of the program, we're going to be heading towards, I think, what everyone's also been waiting for, our Q&A portion. So looks like we've already have some hands raised as well as some questions being shown in the chat box below. So yeah, some people have already raised their hands. So I'm going to be going through these people one by one. But I'm going to be prioritizing number one, what Mr. John Henry Palopos has indicated in the chat box below. So he asks, as the Philippines becomes more involved in AI development and initiatives such as PacSilica, what policies should the government prioritize to ensure that AI growth remains safe, ethical, and beneficial to national security and society? So we're going to be having the open forum until 3:40 p.m. for everyone's information. Thank you.
Yeah, they just answer. Okay. Yeah, sure. So if I understood this correctly, are you asking like, oh, should the Philippines actually be in PacSilica or like agree to it and actually sign off? Like which policies should government prioritize? Because in that case, like if we actually already have PacSilica, I would say that like this is not a policy, but more of like I would ideally want like the government to have like a lot more transparency, for example, in terms of like how it's this like decision making is going with going at Impact Silica. But then in that case, probably something that's a little bit more helpful would be like, yeah, like policies for let's say like technology transfer. Making sure that like folks who could work in that space. So let's say like as I've understood right now, like Pax Silica is around like building off like processing for critical minerals, rare minerals, chip design, and basically doubling down on our assembly testing and packaging, then maybe you should actually have like more like upskilling and like development, like workforce development and that, which includes like education programs as well and also like career transition policies for this. Um I couldn't say for sure like what exactly like it like what exactly would be good just because I mean it's the nature of the Philippines also that like we don't have a lot of like data on this and that's why like a lot of like I think there's an ongoing research for me as well to one of my projects right now is also to look into yeah like what policy approaches should we actually have, but then yeah like I've just started also so I've like minimal idea on what that would look like, and essentially there's a lot of unknowns in terms of like how we could really create actionable policies from the data that we do have because there's a lot of like open endedness in between it. But yeah, I think that those are some things to prioritize at least on top of my head. Yeah.
Thanks, Lens. I think we can move on to the two participants who raised their hands here. So see Mr. Quibalio Justin Reeve. I'm going to allow you to talk so you may um unmute your mic if you have any questions or insights that you would like to share with Lens. Ayun. Okay. Um, feel free po. Ayun po. Okay po. I think po yung audio niyo po is muted. Though I did see na nag-unmute po kayo. Siguro po for now, let's move on po muna to Sir John Luigi Cura. I'm going to be giving you access po to unmute your mic. Thank you. Ayun po. Feel free na po, sir, to unmute your mic, Sir John. Okay po. Sige. So, for participants who'd like to give any insights or ask any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or use the chat box to ask your questions. Pero since currently right now, I think some of our participants are having technical issues with their mics. I think I can ask some questions that were typed in our initial Google Sheet registration form. So one of the things that I noticed there, Lens, no, you've already established different frameworks or groundworks on how we can take advantage of AI as an innovation while also putting limitations so that we we mitigate the risk that comes with it. But I think I want to ask something a bit less technical for our participants. A lot of them actually asked, what are the skills or competencies needed for us to be able to contribute to the growing field of AI safety in the Philippines? I know that you've mentioned now, before you knew like 5 people that was interested in AI safety and governance, but now currently we're at 462 participants, and this number will probably continue to grow given the different discussions about AI and safety in the Philippines. So I'd like to ask, parang, how do we start in this field? Maybe you could walk us through like your journey.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. I think like in general, in terms of skills and competencies, I think a lot of like a safety work has functioned with like a very, very lean team and like very, very small amount of people that in terms of like career direction or like career trajectory, no one has like the same one so far in the community. Like I have like friends who like, for example, like came from law school or like came from like computer science or like came from like arts, for example, or like operations even, and are working in a safety. I personally have like had like my educational backgrounds on like computer science and social anthropology, but I did the social anthropology part more than the computer science part. So yeah, like I wouldn't call myself as a tech person, but then like a lot of I do think like a lot of like the work in this space makes more sense for people who are okay with the non-linearity of like the career trajectory in the space, and also like having a lot more agency and actually diving deep into certain stuff. So I'm not a, for example, like I'm not a geopolitical expert or anything, but something that I'm very, very interested about right now is like middle power research agendas, because I do think it's like quite relevant to be working on that, like as well as like living in the Philippines or in Southeast Asia, which is also the reason why I also had this talk, right? And the thing is like those agenda I could probably just like study it as I go, because a lot of the literature is also kind of just being built as we go. There's very, very few experts in the world on this. They're all very, very keen to like talk to folks around the world and what this could look like. And that's the good thing about how, like being in like an emerging space right now. So yeah, I think like at the end of the day, it's essentially just like if you had like the grit and the agency to like do it anyway, and keep doing it, even though it's quite uncertain, or like you don't really know where it's gonna go. Yeah, you're probably like fit for like something like tech policy or like a safety and governance, right?
Okay, thanks, Lance. So looks like the questions are already piling in. I have some questions in the Q&A box as well as in the chat box as well. So I'm going to be going through them one by one. So here's our own executive director. You mentioned that you took your undergrad in computer science. So si Doc Jago, he wants to ask, what can you say about making strategic decisions on what kind of computer infrastructure we should build? Ayun.
Okay, like just correction. I didn't take my undergrad degree in computer science. I think I took my undergrad degree in interdisciplinary studies. So like,
Okay.
yeah, it was a more of like I majored in both computer science and social anthropology because it's like one of those DIY make your own course type of thing. And the question is like, what kind of, sorry, how
Uh,
can we make
says
decision?
here, um, how we can make strategic decisions on what kind of computer infrastructure we should build. We'd love to be able to hear that about AI safety and governance.
Yeah, definitely. So like in terms of like compute infra, like what do we like? We don't necessarily have like a lot right now. I think in general, like it's the USD who has like compute like high powered compute power right now. That's the only probably the only agency in the Philippines who has. Um, I know a lot of like there is like an AI infrastructure master plan that the ICT will release soon. Um, I think next week, which would probably give more light to that. I didn't work on that or anything, so I also don't know what it contains, but I just know it's gonna release. So that's probably something um that you could look at and also like scrutinize or like even see like think critically and like if it applies. But then I think historically like Philippines has created a lot of ambitious plans which we haven't had a lot of like implementation steps for. Um Maybe doubling down on what you have would be a good way to actually build some sort of like yeah, I guess like infrastructure that is like implementable and enforceable. Um and right now what we do have is like some test packaging for example. Or if we want to do a lot more work within let's say like open weights and how that relates to let's say building our own models, then a lot more investments on that for let's say like research, um even tech transfer, maybe perhaps getting a lot of the research that's already being produced in universities to actually commercialize, for example, is something that's like an interesting thing to look at as well because we do have like technology business incubators across different universities. So I think in general there are already a lot of like sort of like bodies or entities that could facilitate these. It's a matter of like sort of connecting them. Um and yeah, like that sort of depends on like I guess the type of actors that there is in like how they could connect them. Like for example, if like you're a university, right? Um and you have these resources, then that's something that you could probably facilitate in terms of like how let's say the students or the faculty could also spin out research and build towards like more AA projects or something like that.
Thanks, Lance. In connection to what you've said, you've mentioned that the Philippines has a lot of plans in policy making, but right now we're currently, I wouldn't say lagging behind, but we haven't really implemented much concrete stuff yet. So there's an interesting question here. So someone asked, what are the signs or practices that leads to weak policy? Tapos they followed up here. I think an example earlier is overly defined AI can lead to problematic policy or legislation. So in your expert opinion, I wanted to ask, what do you think are, um not so good practices when it comes to AI policy making, and siguro ano din yung mga best practices that we could probably employ as a field or as a region, that's still developing an AI policy framework.
Yeah. I think in terms of legislation, And yeah, like legislation is not the only type of policy anyway, but like for binding ones, like legislation, for example, having like a simpler policy is better for like a state like the Philippines, which has a lot of like moving parts already, um, and a lot of like irrationality in terms of like how the government works, right? Um, and in that case, like for example, trying to do everything at once at the start would probably lead to more complications, and it could probably lead to like delayed implementation of the actual policy if there's so much to actually comply to. Because when you create like legislation, for example, you also have to think about the actors who's actually implementing them. Like, would they actually have capacity to do it? Did they actually um allocate, let's say, like budget or like staff support or whatever that needs to be allocated in the law for them to actually do that function well? And that's harder to see when you have like something that like is really big and is doing a lot of things at the same time. So I'd say like, let's say maybe like one legislation is like one thing. And so like I would want to re-emphasize like my point from earlier, in which creating like, let's say, government authorities or like coordination councils, for example, that could do this as well and do the planning first. And institutionalizing that would be like a good way to probably start, since we do need a lot more like information gathering authorities at this point, um, versus like some like regulate like over regulating something that we also don't know how it would look like in the future. Like yeah, like we said, um, yeah, I guess there's that. In terms of like yeah, what policy could look like, I would say it's that mostly na parang if you have a lot of conflicting provisions as well, or like yeah, it's a lot too ambitious that the actors probably don't even really know how it's gonna be implemented. That's quite problematic. Because like let's be real, like a lot of um the actors are like are also other government agencies, and these government agencies has functioned within with specific rules over like the whole time they've existed, right? And these are people too. Like we don't wanna. It's almost like same with corporate governance. If you want to implement like a policy in corporate governance, you don't want to overwhelm your employees with new rules all the time, because they're probably not gonna do it eventually, because they're probably gonna be very, very confused on what like takes priority. So I think yeah, like it's just like becoming more lean with how you're approaching how we're approaching like binding regulations and even frameworks, for example.
All right, thanks, Lance. So a lot of questions are coming, so keep them coming. We still have 20 minutes for our open forum. A participant, Rom Feria, has been raising their hand for a while now. So, sir or ma'am, I'm gonna be giving you permission to unmute your mic. So feel free lang po to unmute and ask whatever question or insight you want to raise. Thank you.
Maraming salamat. Good afternoon. Actually, I just want to add dun sa question or inquiry earlier about weak governance. No? One of the issues is actually defining what AI is. And if you notice, no, majority of the presentation is talking about generative AI. No? And at the start of the presentation, it was mentioned that AI has been present, since the late 50s. It was actually AI, artificial intelligence is actually a marketing term that was concocted, just to be able to get funding, from the likes of DARPA, International Science Foundation, etc. in the US. And if you're going to take a look at the entire history of AI, there was a time when there is nothing significant coming out of AI. That's what they call the AI winter. So going to the present, going to the now, I think when you do governance, you have to be able to determine exactly what kind of AI are you trying to govern. Ano yung policy mo for specific AI? No? It was mentioned earlier that these frontier model companies are gunning for AGI. No? AGI is not even defined. They themselves cannot even agree on its definition. No? So it's very important when you talk about governance, no, and to prevent the weak governance side is to properly define it. Anong klaseng AI ba pinag-uusapan natin? The AI, I'm calling the sexy AI, the one that a lot of you are familiar with right now because of the chatbots, no, is very much different from the AI that's being used in medicine. No? And unfortunately, isa lang yung nagiging definition. And that's a really, really big risk. When you start talking about AI governance, we have AI policies, we have AI laws. Anong klaseng AI? Ano pinag-uusapan natin na AI? Is it AI that can actually help radiologists? Is it AI that I think this was also mentioned that destroys cognitive skills of kids? Is it AI that is designed to be what do you call this, psychopathic? That an AI that when you interact with chatbots, it never says I don't know. It makes up things. Is that what we want? And one thing also that was not mentioned, ano yung ethical issues? When you talk about governance, you have to go back to ethics. Ano yung ethical issues ng AI? We have frontier models gunning for trillion, for trillions already. Diba? And yet, where are they getting their data? They're exploiting a lot of labor, from Africa, from Kenya. That's very well documented. And I will not be surprised if we have Filipinos also being exploited, by these companies. So it's very important. Let's define it properly, before we even talk about crafting, a policy or at least identify ano ba klase yung AI. Yung pinag-uusapan natin. Okay? Kanina, I think Diego was asking about the infrastructure, computing infrastructure. At the College of Engineering of UP Diliman, we have a lot of NVIDIA GPUs that is being used for modeling. It's also being shared with the AI program of UP Diliman. And if I'm not mistaken, it's also being augmented by another set of GPUs from NVIDIA. That was recently, approved by the UP president. So infrastructure is there. But if you're going to check out exactly what's being researched on, it's very rare that we're going LLM. We may use LLM for research purposes, but we're not developing any of these models. Maybe for ethical reason. Kasi saan tayo kukuha ng data? Laki-laki ng Pilipinas, ang laki-laki ng ambisyon ng Pilipinas. Sabihin na natin, paliitin na natin UP. Pero asan ang data? Yung data natin, hindi nga natin maayos, hindi natin malinis. And that's what will drive everything, all of this machine intelligence. The question I ask is if the speaker actually was able to check the policy of the university. Kung meron siyang comment dun sa policy. Kasi we have the policy, it was released in 2023. And I think that's also a good guide, at least a jump off point, so to speak. Hindi pa ata na fully realize yung policy na yun. And if you can also check, there's a governance framework for AI by the Supreme Court of the Philippines. So siguro sana na i-mention yon at least, para lang meron na ma-compare, and mapuna sana ano yung kulang at ano yung maganda. Yun lang, salamat.
Okay po. Thank you po, Sir Rom Feria, for that very insightful discussion. Siguro po, we can discuss the many different questions pa that we have so far. So may 10 minutes pa naman po tayo for the Q&A. So I'm going to be going through them chronologically. So eto po. One of the questions in here, submitted by Miss Jani Villadar, is how can the Philippines establish AI governance that protects citizens from algorithmic discrimination, misinformation, privacy violations, automated decision making, and surveillance without creating regulations so restrictive that Filipino researchers, startups, educators, and government agencies and businesses become less competitive in the rapidly evolving global AI ecosystem. Ayun, Lance, any thoughts or insights regarding that?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I also was reading it. This is Johnny Villadar, right? Like the what kind of governance framework can realistically assign responsibility when decision making becomes distributed, right? Yep. Okay. Yeah, so right now I think I mean also like echoing what Sir Rob Feria also mentioned, there's also like quite a lot of government initiatives already in terms of creating own frameworks for uh AI. In terms of like I think you mentioned where is it? Is this the one who mentioned algorithmic transparency?
Yes,
It's different. Yeah, right? Sorry, can you
Yeah,
sorry.
no
Yeah.
problem. So this is from Jani Villadar. How can the Philippines establish AI governance that protects citizens from algorithmic discrimination, misinformation?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so yeah, right now we do have like a lot of government agencies who are um crafting their own policies for this. So yeah, like Sir Freya mentioned, there's already one from the SC. There's also like a circular between like for example like CSE and the ICT on AI use in the government. And then yeah, generally like for these frameworks right now they are frameworks, like they are guidelines, and um like essentially it's not something that's yet to like sort of be like as binding as like let's say a law, right? But then I think last year we also have had the e-governance act passed, which had this provision around um like algorithmic decision making in terms of like hiring decisions in the government. And essentially like the IRR did mention that like as a framework they should be like transparent. Now operationalizing that would be the harder part and like the more like the vague part of like how this is gonna go. Because technically just like put a lot of these in a framework and guidelines and you know call it a day. And that's good. Like that's still like a good thing to do. But then being able to actually assign like liability for like these decisions, that's something that would need a lot more consultation and that would need a lot more convening as well in terms of like how we're going to be able to define that. In general, I do think there should be transparency in terms of like when AI is used, government or not, to the user. And the liability part is tricky just because like there are certain risks that are actually carried by the model itself, that the deployer or like the operator may not even know, or the system operator may not even know about. And so in that case, that's where like evaluations and benchmarking do come in. But then I also recognize that for a lot of like government agencies, we don't really have capacity for this as well. So that's, I guess, like the hard part with implementing it. Like it is still like a talent bottleneck. There should be people who are able to actually do these things both in public and private spaces, like sectors. And yeah, that would essentially like, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily remove all of the risk completely, right? But then it could at least like give some sort of traceability to whoever is like responsible for certain decision making. So I hope that answered the question. Because like this is quite a tricky question, but yeah, I do appreciate this. It's like a good thing to think about as well.
All right, thanks, Lance. So I think we could probably have room for two more questions, and I think the next one is bounces off from the last pretty well. Just to be a bit more specific, so this one talks about the creative industry and how AI impacts that. So this is from Sir Dexter Reyes. So he says, "Hi, what are your recommendations or reminders for policymakers on developing policies that protect creators, authors, and other stakeholders in the creative industry as AI rapidly expands across music, film, and book publishing?" I think this is a very timely topic right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like as mentioned earlier, there's a lot of like unethical behaviors and training already that's being done. On a technical level, it's quite difficult to actually trace if, let's say, like certain data is being used, or let's say if like your likeness becomes an output of a model, like you can't actually, like there's actually no guarantee if that's actually because of like um certain data that was trained on, or if it was because of um emerging behaviors within the model that already happened within its like thousands of layers somewhere, right? Um and yeah, at least for generative AI, like a lot of one thing I mentioned earlier, for example, is like being able to like do watermarking and agent IDing. But then on like the policy side, um yeah, this is like I would say like, oh yeah, we could definitely have like AI ethics like guidelines or principles on this, right? Especially for like developers. But then like operationalizing them is the harder part, because if there's no way to actually like um basically map out which data did which output, then you're not even really able to like, let's say, even penalize that, for example, or like actually do anything about it. I think that's what's a bit risky about this. Um, but yeah, I think in general, like at least having frameworks right now in terms of guidelines and like, okay, um, if this is something that like if you're producing certain like artwork or creative work, right, being able to like have ways to sort of opt out of training or something like that would be really, really good. Um, but yeah, that's something that's like quite tricky implementation wise.
All right, thanks, Lens. I think we have room for one more, and there's one last person that's raising their hand. Sir Marvin Ular. So I'm going to be giving you po, sir, access to unmute. So feel free na lang po to ask your question. Thank you. Sir, are you there po? Marvin Ular. Naka-raise hand po kayo? Okay po. Sige po, so I think we can move on na lang po to the next question, our final question. Okay. So we have one from, come on, Jen Dexter, Julia De Castro. This is about benchmarking. At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned about AI achieving certain benchmark performance. I'm curious, when we talk about AI safety, are we also interested in risks that affect our cognitive abilities and maybe overall behavior? Or is AI safety only interested in risks like potential job loss, skills displacement, misalignment, or misuse risks like security threats? I think that's a very interesting question as to, you know, our shortening attention span or any health effects that AI might have on us. So I think it's pretty interesting question.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that is included, in terms of like, what is covered by ASAT. In general, I did talk about the the ones you mentioned just because like it's the ones that are more known by people, are like a little bit, uh there's like less explanation that has to be said basically on what these risks are. Again, like MIT Air's repository did do like a comprehensive like mapping of what the cost of subdomains are for risk, and something to check out. I think what you're saying actually like sounds a little close to like gradual disempowerment, which is not on the MIT risk repository taxonomy, but then it's a paper like by some folks from Charles University that's arguing that in terms of like transformative potential and also like future like catastrophic risk, or not even catastrophic risk, just generally like hard to detect risk, um AI might be like slowly pushing us to be a little bit more disempowered over time across culture, economics, and politics. And that's a little bit closer to, yeah, like how it affects, let's say, cognitive abilities or even like overall behavior, right? And also something that's like worth looking at because again, like social impact studies on AI is not something that we have like huge baselines on. And the little studies we do have on them are usually from like the US. So it would be good to also see where what this looks like in the Philippines.
Okay, thanks for those lands. That was a really fun Q&A. But unfortunately, it's already 3:40. But don't worry. As mentioned kanina naman, Lens did give out their email address. So yeah, we'll be sending also a recording of this talk for everyone that's been asking. Hopefully by next week, so that everything is all archived properly. So to commemorate our gratitude for participating in this webinar, Lens, we'd like to present to you your certificate of appreciation. So on behalf of UPIAC, we'd like to thank you for sharing your insightful thoughts about AI safety and governance in the Philippines. Actually, etong webinar na to, I believe, is yung may pinakamaraming attendance turnout out of all of our webinars in 2026 dito sa ISC. So, congrats on partaking in this event. And thank you again for being with us today. And of course, we'd like to thank our entire audience for actively participating kasi napakaraming tanong and there was a lot of fruitful discussions today. So, thank you to everyone and kay Sir Rom din po for giving an insightful discussion on the importance of defining AI. Uh, so before we end today's session po, we'd like to ask our participants to fill out your evaluation forms for today's webinar. Pag na-fill out nyo po ito, we will be granting you guys your certificate of participation no more than 5 working days after the event. So that's next Wednesday po. Kasi of course we are also trying our best to continuously improve our webinar. So we'll be flashing this po for a minute just so that everyone has enough time to scan the QR code or go to the link. Thank you. Okay po. So it's been a hot minute. Thank you po once again. To stay updated on future UPIAC events, don't forget to like and follow our Facebook page and our website. Nandyan lang po yan. Tapos alam ko din po, nagtanong din po kami if you'd like to be updated in our public newsletter. So regularly check your emails na lang po because nagsasend po kami ng mga updates on webinars and we do these monthly. So maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Ako nga pala po si Lance from UPIAC. And I wish you guys and everyone a great day. Salamat po. Thank you.
Recording stopped.